You've probably heard mid-century modern is cool. Yes, the secret's out, and I want to make it. But what is modern? So I have a confession, and that's that I am always so embarrassed with how messy and cluttery my shop is. But right now, it is so stinking clean in here. And I don't know about you, but I think we should do something about that. All right, so what are we making? Here's the plan. Technically, one might consider this a console table. It's essentially a box on a base, and it is absolutely 100% not a mid-century modern design, right? We'll get into that. Sound good? Let's do it. Careful material selection and attention to wood grain is one of the best ways to turn an average piece of furniture into something special. Well, yes, these are outside of my cut area and the board that I would use. What these defects tell me is there's some weird tension in the board, and we're also crossing at branches. So I don't think I'll use this board, at least for the case. But it's super pretty, so maybe we'll find a place for it in the base of the table. This is super dense walnut. I think I should rip this down. You know what they say about little shops, little tools. And my little tools are just not going to cut it for this dense stuff. I have a hard time with this next part because I find it to be the most boring part of a build, but I think it's necessary to connect the dots from A to B. So I'm going to rip it, I'm going to slice it, and then I'm going to reassemble everything. Then we can get into the more interesting stuff. In order to achieve the depth of this box, aka case or carcass, I'll be slicing the board open like a butterflied filet mignon. This will give really nice symmetry from the front to the back of the box. By ripping it in half first, I'll have much less for my bandsaw to cut through, which should result in a cleaner, flatter box. And everyone loves a well-maintained box. Right, so that was easy, huh? If you do want to see all of that process that we just did in detail, you can see it in many of my other videos, any video, really, all of them. Now that the flat is done, we need to turn this into a box, and this is where I need to decide miters or dovetails. And the thing that dictates which one of those that I'm going to use is going to be budget. In this case, I pitched it as dovetails. We needed to come down to hit a price point. And to do so, I'm just going to take some of the time out of it, and we're going to do miters with dovetail keys. Strength is going to be the same. Look is going to be very similar. And I save about a week's worth of sawing out wood. Let's build a box. Right, while we work on these miters and build out this box, what is modern? Because being original at the same time as matching a style can be really complicated. The Creative Naming Committee has ironically picked the least creative ways to describe art movements. We have modern, postmodern, mid-century modern, and arguably none of those look very freaking modern. I mean, damn it guys, seriously? We can't just go around calling yesterday today. It's confusing. With the miters cut, before assembling the box, I need to make all of the dados and grooves that will support the shelves and dividers inside the box. There's few things as relevant today as they were 80 years ago, especially style. That is, with the exception of mid-century modern. The mid-century modern movement started in the 1930s with its height from somewhere around the 40s to 60s. This new era of industrialization and global design influence ushered in organic industrial designs that were rooted in the desire to rebuild a world devastated by war, offering optimism, functionality, and accessibility. I've always aimed to hit a sweet spot of a contemporary take on classic lines. So today I'm building my modern take of a postmodern, mid-century modern table. Stupid naming committee. I've always aimed to hit a sweet spot of a contemporary take on classic designs, classic lines. Or in this case, more accurately, a contemporary take on early postmodern design. Stupid naming committee. With the dados and grooves made on the inside of the box, before assembling, the partition that divides the box can be made and joinery cut into the slot into those interior grooves of the box. Rather than finicking with fine-tuning shims on the dado stack or bumping over the fence on the table saw, I get as close as I can and hone down the last little bit of the fit using a shoulder plane. Sneaking up on the fit ensures that nothing is ever sloppy. Remember, nobody likes a sloppy box. In order to make sure the partitions come in and seat completely, I come back through and square off the end of the dados, so the partitions can slide all the way forward. This can be done one of two ways, either with a chisel or a router, or a combination of both. And before we get all of this glued together, I like to take that front edge and back edge and just make sure it's smooth. I prefer to plane the edge rather than sand it. With the interior joinery done, using epoxy I can go ahead and close up the box. And while that sets up, we can go ahead and move our attention down to the base and we can begin to cut out the rough parts of the legs. I've translated my CAD models into paper templates and just cut those out in order to give myself a template to follow for these complicated legs. The legs at the base are a combination of tapers from top to bottom and outside to inside, with a curve where any of the parts meet at an obtuse angle. Why only on the obtuse angles, you might ask? The answer is easy. I have no idea, but it looked right. Using a sled fixture on the table saw, I'm able to rough out the tapers. And while I still have a flat, straight reference face, before cutting the curves, it's over to the panel router to cut the mortises and tenons at all the intersections that weren't at the ends of the boards. That's nubbin and nebbin hole in the edges for you common folk. This will give lots of surface area or glue to stick the pieces together. Now, I goofed and I overcut one of the tenons. So, pretty easy fix. I simply glued some veneer back onto the faces of the nubbin and tried again after making a very small adjustment to the template guide on the fence of the panel router. Oopsies. As for the ends of the sticks, I'll use a bridle joint to connect these. It's basically a naked tenon and mortise, and buff in the nude to boot. My bit wasn't quite long enough for the back vertical leg, so I opted to finish the depth of that cut on the table saw and clean up the bottoms with a chisel because I like chisels and they make me feel alive. My new SawStop table saw has a really cool feature where it's supposed to cost $200 every time you hit something metal, but I'm thankful that the sparks thrown here from a screw in my jig weren't cause for the finger tacks. Live to learn the hard way another day. Look at all those tidy holes, isn't that satisfying? Yeah, I could just cozy up and take a dang old nap in those tidy holes. Before final assembly, what I'm going to want to do is create a solid template that I can route against. I could use the paper and fair every curve, but I think this will make a little more consistent shape overall over the entire table. I'm going to trace the outline, and once the shape is roughed out, we can start to add some taper and some form, some sex appeal to these blocky ass legs. I had a little variance from my model to my final pieces, so I redefined the curves at the join and faired them using a combination of a couple rasps and sandpaper glued to a dowel. Then the curved pieces are cut as close to the template tracing as possible on the bandsaw, and the final 1/16 of an inch is template routed down to final dimensions on the router. Before rounding all the edges over on the legs, and while I still have flat faces to reference off of, I can cut the joinery for the frame of the base, again, doing this on the panel router. I may have cut the outside to inside tapers on the legs a little bit early, but I was able to restore a flat reference by temporarily gluing the wedged offcuts back onto the taper. Once I can be sure that the legs and the frame of the base all fit together and line up, I can disassemble and glue before honing the final shape into the legs. This part always reminds me of West Coast Customs. It was an old TV show on Discovery Channel where they build the bike, tear it down, and then build it up again. It's kind of annoying, but totally necessary. I can see that one guy typing it now. Someone always does. I'm so disappointed to see this. Fine woodworking doesn't have screws. That's what they sound like too. And guys, screws are freaking great. I don't know if you've ever used them before, but they're awesome. And they're really strong. And if Sam Maloof can use them on his fancy-ass rocking chairs, so can I. They make for great clamps in weird places. Don't worry, I'll plug the holes. Relax. And while those dry, it seems like there's something missing. What could it be? It's a box. Do boxes have all the sides? Technically, it's a extruded square. You know what? That doesn't really matter. It's a box. I was thinking though, isn't it weird that walnuts are walnuts, oaks have acorns, and corn nuts taste like Cool Ranch? Weird. Let's put it back in this thing. I just gotta say, I love good tools, and people often hit me up to know quality sources to buy their tools, so I wanted to put you all onto KM Tools. It's run by fellow woodworker Jonathan Katz-Moses, and he's one of us. Woodworker, content creator, so he knows the deal. The tools he carries are ones you'll actually use and appreciate. He's a good dude and someone on the business side that I definitely look up to, and that's the kind of company I'm always happy to recommend. Tools. Here's a few I've purchased from KM Tools that I can recommend, and these were not given to me. I bought these over the years with my own money. First, Katz-Moses stop block. It's stupid simple, but it just works. And repeat cuts. They're dead on every time, with no deflection like some of the flimsier options. Need to cut dovetails? One of the first products he launched that I have used on many a dovetail are these magnetic dovetail guides, tidy tails, clean shoulders, all cut by hand. I've also been using these Zenwu chisels and sharpening system. My buddy Luke makes these and they are solid, especially this drop. It's got some sort of magic schmegma embedded in it that keeps edges stupid sharp for easy honing, touch up while you work. What's cool is that KM Tools also gives back. A chunk of what they make goes towards woodworking education and supporting underserved communities like woodworkers with disabilities. So yeah, you're getting great tools, but you're also helping out the next wave of woodworkers. You should definitely go check out the link in the description and use code Sawyer if you like tools. It's worth it, and you'll be supporting not only a small business in the community as well as this channel, all while setting yourself up with some dope tools. One more time, that's code Sawyer at kmtools.com using the link down below. Thanks to KM Tools for making this build possible. Now let's get back to it. With the same theme as the front of the case, I tack on a little grain matching strip that I set aside earlier to complete the frame around the back panel of the case. Details, baby. Details. And since this is going from high humidity in Oregon To my client in the desert, I'm mostly considering wood movement a la shrinkage, so I'm comfortable leaving a little headroom at the top of the back and affixing the back after it slides into place with a single as opposed to slotted attachment point. This is all assuming and accounting for the fact that that panel will move. I use just a little paraffin to lube my screw. I'm getting to that age, boys. Well, in case you were wondering, you guys have been asking where it went. We have found it and we have brought Sexy back. Yep, here's the game plan. These two holes in front, this one and this one, those are not going to be holes. Well, they are, but they're going to be filled. On one side, I'm going to put a couple drawers in, and the other side is going to be a shelf. And right now, we're going to make both of those. Yep, okay. The little frame shelves that the drawers sit on are called dust shelves. They're on the inside where it doesn't really get dusty, so I'm not really sure the etymology there, but let's roll with that. The dust shelves on the right half of the cabinet and the shelf on the left get a continuous strip of wood that was taken off the front of the case when we first started in order to give continuous grain that matches the case all the way across the front. Details, baby, details. I also added a small dust shelf runner to keep the drawers from dragging on the finished lip just inside the case. While all of that sets up, and before we move on to the piston fit half-blind dovetail flex on these drawers, let's get the miters secured at the corners of the case. These are dovetail keys because they sit across the join. If they were within the join, they'd be splines. The keys will act to bridge the miter join and add a little detail as well as strength to the corners of the box. Once the dovetail keys are dry, they're flush cut, and I've opted to soften the overall feel and look of this piece with a hefty roundover using a big ass roundover bit. The front and back edges of the box are supported with a sandwich of plywood. This will keep my big ass bit from blowing out the precious grain at the front and the back edge. Okay, we got a little sidetracked, but the insides and outside of the box are dry and now ready for the functional bits of the interior. Drawers. Let's make them. After resawing and sizing the cherry drawer sides, fronts, and backs, I can take the drawer sides over to the table saw to start the dovetails. For this, I'm using an 8.2 degree tooth grind on a custom thin curved blade. The odd angle equates to a 1/7 pitch for the dovetail sides, which just happens to be my go-to and favorite, aesthetically speaking. After taking a quick rabbet out of the back side to reference against the front of the drawer, I can transfer these tails over the drawer faces to excavate the pins. The edges of the pins after transfer are hand sawn using my bad axe saw, as close to the transfer lines as I'm comfortable. And then the bulk of the waste is taken freehand by the router. I then chop and pare down all of the extra waste down to the transfer lines. Doing it this way is a little bit extra work, but worth it in the sex appeal. The back of the drawers will slide into a sliding dovetails at the back of the drawer sides, and the bottom will fit into a groove that we cut at the bottom of the inside faces of the drawer components. After dry fitting all of the drawer parts to make sure that everything fits and works, the drawer can be deconstructed, and I've selected a custom knurled brass drawer pull, or knob, and decided to set it back in a curved recess in the face of the drawer. This left me with screws for the pull that were too long. By first screwing on a nut, I can grind off the excess of the screw, and unthreading the nut will repair the boogered threads at the end of the screw, making threading the knob as easy as new. That was a hot tip. With that, the drawers can now be assembled. And while the glue dries, let's turn our attention back to the base. It's all clean up and finished from here. The final details seem to take as long as the bulk build and are so important to a worthy piece. It's the last 10% that separates the haves from the have-nots. It's important to take your time here, as I've learned the hard way. Okay, finally time to round over these tapered legs. This was tricky. It required a lot of handwork, a lot of fairing, and a lot of just doing it by hand and by eye. Again, the shit that makes me feel alive inside, and honestly lose a little sleep at night. Bringing together all the final details is always a welcome reprieve. It's chill. It doesn't require all the executive decision making. It's a good time to think, and while I worked, I wondered. Mid-century modern was the industrial design revolution. It brought quality and style to everyone. Here's a weird thing though. If industrial design is honed and optimized for production and custom is the exact opposite of streamlined, can this table even be considered custom mid-century modern, or is that just oxymoronic? In 20 years, assuming mid-century modern is still vogue, I might be persuaded on changing my opinion with the whole naming conventions. In 2044, it will once again be mid-century, and it'll once again be modern times once we get there. So will mid-century modern now become old century modern, last century modern? Or my vote would be maybe mid-century contemporary. Every generation is an answer in the opposite direction because kids always think they're cooler than their parents. I know I certainly did. In furniture, we had the fine joinery and understated handcrafted elegance of arts and crafts, followed by Art Deco geometry, intricate, layered opulence. The answer was the post-war boom of mid-century modern, European industrial designers with sleek style and streamlined operation. Style at the production level. Then the world discovered drugs, and things got funky. The 70s brought in what the stupid pretentious naming committees call postmodernism, along with some of the ugliest carpet and coolest lighting fixtures yet. And then that streamlined production pendulum once again swung too far and somehow led us to the 80s and 90s. Cool neons and shapes and fashion, but couches are suddenly inflatable and they printed pictures of cheap red oak wood grain on top of particle board that swelled and blistered at even the hint of some back sweat. What the hell was that? Too much acid, maybe. Quaaludes. Definitely Coke and Quaaludes. Yikes. Bad news bears. And then it kind of seems like the world ran out of new ideas, and those ranch homes we millennials cringed at as children are once again the coolest thing in the world because it's all we can afford. So it's back to mid-century modern. What's next? Where are we headed? The point of all this is that I think there are things that stand the test of time, nuance that transcends generations, details to glean from everywhere and integrate anywhere. That's my favorite part of what I do. Like music has a way of connecting people, I believe furniture is art, and it can do the same. So that leaves us with one question. Is this mid-century modern? It's custom and 0% designed for production. The lines are obviously inspired by the era, but I don't think by definition it can be. What do you think? Does it even matter, or have the semantics of some drug-riddled, state-employed naming committee distracted from the point? I don't know. You tell me.
Look, I don't want to talk. How you try and press the kid and really you was...
As for this piece, I'm absolutely in love with it. This is one I'm going to have a really hard time watching leave the shop. From the detailing on the gentle, rounded corners of the grain-matching butterflied case, to the understated, sharp, yet soft angles in the legs and base. The proportions make it feel balanced, yet substantial, useful, so much more than your average slab-on hairpins in the entry of most homes. We live in overt subtlety, and the subtlety defines us. I always try to push myself, even in the intangibles, because if I stay in the same place too long, the plateau becomes the precipice, and there is no prized perfection, only the end of pursuit. Thanks to my patrons, client, and to KM Tools. You can support the work I do here by using the links in the description. And as always, thank you for watching. I'm Nick, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace!
I don't want to speak, talking all that good, so I just hit you with the plays. Running up the score like Tyreek, I'm going deep. Watch me how I'm saucing, I be spreading it with ease. You gon' see the peas, you gon' see the...